We're good. Carbs. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And now carbs, we've all heard they're bad for us. They're the reason why people can't lose weight. Then we've heard the other side where we can eat carbs. Well, so what's the deal? And it's always somewhere in between. And then with every other nutrition question, it's a big it depends burger. So first I want to talk about sources of carbs. If you are getting most of your carbohydrates from fruits, vegetables, and complex carbohydrates such as rice and potatoes, you're already winning the game. Does this mean you can never eat pasta, you can never eat bread, you can never eat cookies? No, no, no. If you've been in this group long enough, you know that's not how we roll here. But that being said, it's a no-brainer, it's common sense that if we keep denying that quality matters, you're living in la la land. Quality matters dietary. And again, there's times and places to have delicious things. I just celebrated my birthday. My amazing wife picked up an amazing peanut butter, like a peanut butter chocolate silk pie. And you better believe I had a big old slice for my birthday, and I maybe finished one of my daughter's slices too. It's my birthday. I'm going to do what I want. So, that being said, fruits, vegetables, complex carbohydrates. You can't go wrong. And if you're like, well, what, white potatoes or sweet potatoes? Honestly, that's kind of overblown. There's a scale you can find. It's the satiety index scale. And white potatoes actually have one of the highest satiety indices rankings out of all foods. Meaning, white potatoes, we're not talking French fries now, but a baked or roasted or air fried white potato, they fill you up for not that many carbs, to be honest. So, if you get most of your carbs from whole food sources, you're doing pretty dang good. Then, how much carbs should I eat? Now, again, this is such a big question. So, for those of you who are here and working with me one-on-one, this may not apply to you because we've figured out what's a good point for you. But a baseline for anyone. So I'm not talking about super active people. I'm not talking about people that are strength training a ton or doing triathlons. A baseline is 1 gram per pound of target body weight. 1 gram per pound of target body weight. So if your target body weight is 140 pounds, 140 grams of carbohydrates a day. That's a baseline. Now, you also may have heard in this group, we talk about what's a good protein goal. Well, the same thing. 1 gram per pound of target body weight is a pretty dang good goal. So a 1-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein for a baseline. Then you fill in the fats based off your calories that you figure out you need to eat to lose weight, to gain muscle, whatever it is. Fill in the rest of the fats. But carbohydrates now are intake is dictated by intense exercise. And I double underline, bold, highlight the word intense because, not to be a Debbie Downer here, but a lot of people who think they train intensely, you're not training intensely. I'm not saying you. I'm just saying doing a 45-minute, hour-long sweaty boot camp, you get sweaty, you get out of breath. That is not that kind of training. If you're doing 10-pound dumbbell overhead presses and then 10-pound rows and then doing some burpees and this, you're sweaty, you're huffing, you're puffing, you're burning calories. But that type of activity is not actually utilizing carbohydrates for a fuel source. High intense activity, if we're talking cardio, we're talking sprint work. We're talking whether it's on a bike or a rower or running, or we're talking real heavy strength training. So if you're doing a squat, you're not able to carry a conversation and squat up and down. And so, how was your weekend? Oh, it was pretty good. You are like that kind of training that utilizes, just like sprint. If it's a leisurely jog, you're not utilizing carbohydrates for fuel. Your body's not going to demand more carbohydrates, nor is your body going to process those carbohydrates for what they should be processed for. We're talking high intensity sprint work, high intensity strength training. And again, the heavy load is relative, but if you are lifting at an RPE, a rate of perceived exertion of a 9, you could probably afford some more carbs. Now, another thing that dictates your carb intake is your overall leanness. So people who carry a lot more body fat, especially central adiposity, we call it pear shape, we call it, beer gut, maybe not the most politically correct term, but is what it is. Those people tend to be more insulin resistant, meaning they may not have type 2 diabetes, but they may be pre-diabetic. Their body doesn't process carbohydrates like it should. So those people also tend to do better on lower carbohydrate diets if you carry a lot of your fat in your trunk. That being said, one of the best ways to increase your insulin sensitivity is strength training. And I've talked about this here before. When you strength train and lift weights, think about this as the surface of a muscle tissue. When you strength train, these little receptors called GLUT4 receptors wiggle their way to the surface and they say, give me carbs, give me glucose. So it makes your body more insulin sensitive versus insulin resistant, which is a good thing. So strength training, even if you're trying to lose weight, should be your foundation. I can't stress it enough. Now, 1 gram per pound of target body weight is a baseline. Again, if you're super active, if you're doing intense activity, how much more carbs should you add per hour of training, per workout, per week? That is where that takes some time. And I'm not even going to throw out a general number here because everyone's going to be different. Another big thing too is ladies, depending where you're at on your hormonal phases of life, after you get through menopause or even perimenopause, your body tends to not handle carbohydrates as well because your estrogen levels are lower. Estrogen also helps with insulin sensitivity. So again, another great way to offset. All of a sudden, women hit menopause, they never stored body fat around their waist, and all of a sudden they get I've heard it referred to as like the menopot, like a menopot belly. Strength train. Make your body more insulin sensitive. Then as far as spacing carbohydrates out, like should I eat a little bit in the morning, a little bit, again, it's so interdependent, and at the end of the day, calories are what matters most. If your goal is to change your body composition, calories have to be controlled for. But 50 grams per meal maximum if you're not actively, intensely exercising. So again, if you're like, well, Mike, I only eat 3 meals a day. That's 50 grams is 150 grams of carbs a day, and that's not that much. Oh, and by the way, the average American eats 300 grams of carbs a day, and the average American is very sedentary. And if you don't believe me, look at how easy it is, especially if you eat a lot of processed and snacky foods. It's easy, and if you're drinking any sort of carbohydrates, soda, juices, it is very easy to consume 300 grams of carbs. But if you go back to the start of this talk and I said fruits, vegetables, complex carbs, it's much harder to get to 300 grams of carbs. It can still be done, but it's much harder versus if you're drinking soda or sugary drinks or eating pasta and that sort of stuff. It's much harder. So 50 grams max per meal if you're not exercising intensely. Now, you can up that. Obviously, a leaner, more muscular person that's training hard can probably tolerate more. If you have more body fat, you probably tolerate less. The other thing too, that when you eat, especially if you're not exercising, your body is you're going to drive up your blood glucose levels, and then that in turn, assuming you have a healthy pancreas, is going to drive up your insulin levels because insulin gets driven up when your blood sugar is high to push the blood sugar or the sugar into storage. That can cause a low blood sugar crash later. The higher insulin spikes, the more it pulls down your blood sugar, and that can lead to a crash. So if you're eating like the traditional American breakfast, a big stack of pancakes, big bowl of cereal, some orange juice, and some fruit, and having like easily 100 grams of carbs at breakfast, and then you're wondering why you're crashing mid-afternoon, that could be it. I'm honestly, if you find you're doing that, I'm a big fan of this strategy. And again, this is not a one-size-fits-all. Try eating a very low-carb breakfast. High protein, higher fat, very low carb. Maybe just some veggies mixed in some eggs or something. Or some berries mixed in a smaller amount of oatmeal, but then a higher amount of protein. So we're talking like 20 grams of carbs at breakfast at most. If you find that you get those like early to mid-afternoon crashes, even after eating lunch, give it a try. Again, there's no harm in trying. You're not going to die if you try it one time. This also increases what's called metabolic flexibility and gives our body the most largest opportunity to burn fat for fuel. So this is a little overblown in some circles where it's like, do cardio in the morning fasted and don't eat carbs because then you're going to only burn fat throughout the day. It doesn't work quite that simply, but it is true that studies show that having lower carbohydrates in the morning, if your body isn't very metabolically flexible. So again, if you are more on the higher body fat side versus the lean side where you have good metabolic flexibility, you have good insulin sensitivity, this may not pertain to you if you're like just trying to lose the last 5-10 pounds. But for someone who's quite a bit larger, has a lot of body fat, yeah, this can be a very beneficial swap where you just eat very low carb at breakfast, kind of work your carbs around your training because you should be exercising before for fuel, after for fuel, and then taper them later. What about carb loading? What if I am working out? Should I have some carbs before I work out? Unless you are doing a intense 90 plus minute session, you probably don't need to carb load. You definitely don't need to carb load, especially if you've eaten a meal within, I don't know, 3 hours, 4 hours. Even if you're training first thing in the morning and you ate a meal at 6 o'clock at night and you train at 6 o'clock in the morning, well, you're fasted for 12 hours, but you didn't really burn much fuel while you slept. Right? You're not burning a ton of calories in your sleep. Your body's repairing itself. It actually burns predominantly fat while you sleep. That's why sleep is such a bonus for fat loss. Your body taps into your fat stores at most when you're sleeping. Oh, now the comments are rolling in. Hi everyone. Very cool. So yeah, that is the good, the bad, the ugly on carbs. Obviously, there's a lot of individualization that needs to happen, but go back to the start. Quality, you can't go wrong there. And then that baseline. And if you are more active, then you can go a little bit higher. But at the end of the day, try, if your target body weight is 150 pounds, try 150 grams of carbohydrates.